Coming to you from the greatest city in the world, this is the #1 showbiz podcast. It's Talk for Two. Here's your host, Matt Bailey.
Thank you, Gary Owen, a mighty fine ventriloquist and broadcaster himself. We're thrilled to have him as our announcer. And thank you, everyone. Well, here we are. The end of a week of episodes, and finally at number 100 itself. We've had a fun time with guests I never imagined I would talk to. We round out the week and get back to our roots with a gentleman I never imagined I could be able to talk to, Mr. Jimmy Nelson. As always, I want to start off by thanking our season sponsors, Axtel Expressions and the Tangent Bound Network. They are two of the reasons we are able to hit number 100 today. Our episode sponsor today, something quite new, is I'm No Dummy, the documentary by Brian W. Simon, in which Mr. Jimmy Nelson appears. Check it out at Amazon.com. Go ahead and buy it, all right? Please, please, you will not regret it. Now, working on this week for the last few months, I realized that when we got here to this day, there would be a few other important entities I'd want to thank. I want to thank you listeners, of course, as I always do. This is for you. It's never not been for you. You push me to give you better content and for me to be a better producer. I've said it many times, you helped me fall in love with doing this thing called podcasting. And I also want to thank my family. I know I don't really get personal on here, but their love and support, your love and support, if I may speak directly to the family listening today, gives me the encouragement when the guest getting gets tough and producing this thing just seems to get eked out with everything else I got to prioritize. Your support is so meaningful. I mean, you support a crazy, nutso, insane vision here, not to mention a less than sane son, grandson, cousin, and nephew. Thank you so much. And lastly, because I don't think we've ever really done this before, I want to thank each and every single guest. At the top, I said I did some thinking about how we got to this point, and I realized it's one episode at a time, just like everything else. Counting this week in Mr. Nelson, at 100 episodes, we have had 92 people on this program. Whether you were on one time or more, as part of a group or by yourself, thank you for helping us get to this point. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And that's enough of the sappy stuff. Let's get to the reason you tuned in today. If you don't know who Jimmy Nelson is, you are in for a treat. And if you do know who Jimmy Nelson is, you know how special this treat is. I said I never thought I could talk to Mr. Nelson because he's such a legend. What could I ask that hasn't been quizzed of him already? Known for his characters Danny O'Day and Farfel, Mr. Nelson and his cast were Nestle's spokes team for over 10 years. Nestle's Quick, of course. In the mid-20th century, you could not turn on your TV without finding Jimmy Nelson. Whether it was Nestle's, Ed Sullivan, or any of the other variety shows of the day, the nation knew the name Nelson. Of course, Jimmy Nelson is only half the story of Jimmy Nelson. In a rare, candid discussion, Mr. Nelson speaks about falling and staying in love and show business with his dear, beloved Betty. Let's not waste another second. Here now, in a retrospective on an incredible career, Talk for Two presents its 100th conversation, our interview with Jimmy Nelson. Mr. Jimmy Nelson, welcome to Talk for Two. This is really exciting and a treat to have you for our 100th episode. Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Matt. And I understand this is your 100th broadcast.
Yes, we're really excited about it and could not think of a better name and a better person than one of the most respected ventriloquists and really entertainers in the world. So this
My
is...
goodness. That's nice, very nice praise, and I thank you for that.
Well, thank you. Well, hey, this is great, and I want to dive in. I like to begin at the beginning with all of my ventriloquial guests. How did you get started in ventriloquism?
Well, like so many youngsters have done, I was about 10 years old and, had different hobbies. I liked doing magic, but I wasn't very good at it. I liked singing. I tried a little bit, but most of it had show business connected to it. and ventriloquism seemed to grab me. I just fell into it naturally and forgot all about the other hobbies and concentrated on them.
That's wonderful. Now, when you first took it up in a mix with all of these other hobbies, what attracted you to it? Why do you think it kind of overrode everything else?
I think it probably was because I was rather just bashful, I guess is the word, when I was around 10, 11 years old. And I had trouble getting up in front of people, especially at school, like you had to do your things that you have to say. I would get up and be very. I found out, and my teacher let me bring my little ventriloquist figure to school, that if I got up with him, hey, I lost my inhibitions because if I goofed, it wasn't me; it was that little kid on my knee, and that's really how I really got into it. I let him do all the talking. I just kind of said yes and no, and let him be the star, and he was, and I lost my inhibitions.
Was that the beginning of I know we had Willie Tyler on many months ago, and he said he really only had one character. Looking back, did you only have one variation of Danny after the other? Is that when he started to develop, or did he come later?
You're talking about Danny's personality?
Yes.
Yeah. No, that came later. Right now, it was just trying to talk without moving my lips, and I'm afraid he didn't have much character. Matter of fact, I was very young. My voice hadn't changed yet, and I've got some vintage recordings that I had made at school, and you can't tell the difference between Danny O'Day and Jimmy Nelson. We both sounded alike.
Yeah.
It took a while to divide and decide what kind of personality he should have.
Yeah. And you really wanted to. I was talking with Brian Simon, the director of I'm No Dummy, and we'll talk about your involvement in that in a second. And he said you really wanted to give Danny attitude when you were finally able to work on that character. Can you talk a little bit about how you went about creating that personality and making sure he had the right attitude?
Well, by this time, I had been a fan of Edgar Bergen, and I realized what a great personality he had created in Charlie McCarthy, his figure. And listening to him on radio every Sunday night, I kind of absorbed that personality. Charlie McCarthy was a fresh kid, but he was not offensive. You know, he was just, he could get away with things, and poor Edgar got put down all the time. Now, I didn't want to copy Charlie McCarthy, so but I did find a lot of his personality that I put into Danny O'Day. Danny was a little softer. He wasn't quite as brash as Charlie. He let me speak. he let me talk a little bit. Yeah.
That's just awesome, and it's great. Now, I'm sorry for jumping around a little bit, but we kind of got on the Danny train here. I want to go back to your beginnings in ventriloquism because I'm very curious. You know, so many, my generation included, from Jeff on upward, really the premier source for learning ventriloquism was your record, and it is. It really still is. How did you learn? What literature was there for you when you wanted to figure out how to do this art?
Well, when I was starting out, we had no recordings, no books. There were some books on ventriloquism. One was written by Edgar Bergen, another one by Paul Winchell, and they were excellent, but they were so technical that a youngster, 10, 11, 12 years old, trying to start ventriloquism, you'd read a few pages and you'd get lost.
Yeah.
At least that was my experience. So what I did was just copy what I had seen. I'd seen a few ventriloquists at personal appearances in Chicago. That was my hometown. And I was able to go to some of the theaters where vaudeville was still alive.
Yeah.
And they would almost always have a ventriloquist on the bill. So I found something I could take from one and take from the other. But it was all self-taught in those days. You really, I knew you had to talk without moving your lips, so that's what I worked at.
Yeah.
And then, as we just talked about, creating the personality came later.
Is that the most important part to you, making sure that the vent doesn't move their lips? Because the debate rages about what's the most important element of ventriloquism. Is it the lip movement for you or something else?
It's something else. Lip movement is basic. You have to learn that. That's what ventriloquism is all about. But what separates the men from the boys or the boys from the girls, whatever, is the fact that you can take that not moving of the lips and work it into your routines. I have found that even the best ventriloquists will move their lips from time to time. Edgar Bergen is a great example of that. But it didn't matter because his character was so strong that you forgave him. As a matter of fact, you stopped looking at him and you began to look only at Charlie. So here again is where your lip movement and the character comes together. They actually are both, I would say, just as important.
Yes. And you talk about strength of character. What's the most important thing for a vent to keep in mind when they're creating a character and they want it to be really, really strong?
Well, it depends, of course. Creating a character, most of us start out with one figure on the knee, the old-fashioned way, and it's just a bunch of jokes where the dummy usually puts the ventriloquial person down, and this gets laughs. That's the basic way we all started. The development came later.
Yeah, it's great. So let's get back to your career, and you talked a little bit about Danny, and we talked a little bit about that. But there's another part of your act that is just as important, but rarely talked about, and she is the lovely Betty Nelson. It's so rare that you talk about her because, and it's important. I think she's one of the most important parts of your act. I think you'd agree. How did she become involved? How'd you meet her? And what do you, looking for the words here, but how would you rate her importance in your act? What did she do for your act when she came along?
Well, first of all, I married her.
Yeah.
but that was not at the beginning. We met. I was working the supper clubs, and so was she. I didn't know her yet.
Yeah.
And we were booked together at the Radisson Hotel Flame Room, a very nice club in Minneapolis. I was appearing there, and my agent said, "We need an opening act for you, and we don't have anybody available, but there's a young lady working in Milwaukee at the moment. I think we can get her, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." And next thing you know, she was opening the show for me, and she was so good. She was a singer and wonderful voice, and she did a lot of novelty tunes, so she got a lot of laughs. And for a while there, before I went on, I said, "Hey, listen, I don't know if I can follow her. she's too good." But she was good. We worked together on that engagement. In fact, it worked so well that my agent began to book us as a unit, and we worked together a lot at different hotels and nightclubs that we were working at the time. So naturally, it all evolved, and I now popped the question. I thought we might as well work together. We might as well be married, and we were.
That's lovely. That's lovely. Now I gotta ask, because I'm an old sap over here. When did you fall in love? When did you know you were in love with your touring partner and this very special woman to you?
Oh, that's a question that, of course, is very hard to answer. When you work with a person day and night. We would have rehearsals during the day. We would perform at night and go out for something to eat after the show, that type of thing, where you're not even thinking of falling in love. It just happens.
Yeah.
And it happened, and we have been married now for 57 years.
That's lovely.
Well, they said it wouldn't last.
Hey.
Show business marriages don't last.
So what do you attribute to your longevity? Is it that you always work together all these years?
Oh, my wife's patience. That's what holds us all together.
It's lovely. It really is. And it's you treat her with such respect, and you yourself have such class about you. It's this perfect. It really is this perfect marriage, if you'll forgive the thing is, you two are soulmates, and everybody at the convention sees it every year. And it's just one of the things that I think we all hope we can achieve is to find somebody that we match with on so many different levels. And
well, that's very nice to hear. No marriage is perfect, and but she and I work at it, and it seems to have worked all these years.
But you talk about how she kind of got mixed in with your act, and you became the duo. If you had to pinpoint something she did when she came in for your show, what would it be? How did she improve it? How did she make it different, make it better? What's the one thing you'd say she contributed?
You mean that when we started working together?
Yeah. How did it affect your performance?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think. Well, as I said, I think one reason it may have improved my performance is, as I told you a couple of minutes ago, when she first started working with me, I thought she was so good I wasn't going to be able to follow her.
Yeah.
So it made me work a little harder. Yeah. Actually, I put her into the act. When we started working, she did her act, I did mine. It was a 2-act show. We suddenly realized she could talk, she could speak, she had a great sense of humor. So we began putting her in my act. She would do her act, her show, half an hour, whatever it was, and I would do mine. And in the middle of mine, I would bring her on, and we had worked out several routines. She worked a routine with my secondary figure, Humphrey Higsby.
Yes.
That went over very well. And she would bring a figure out to me when I needed another character and take it. So rather than bring it out and just hand it to me, she would stick around, and then we would have a couple of lines. Danny, of course, would ogle her. Humphrey would try and grab her. We'd do a few things like that, and then she would leave, and I would finish mine. So it became one long act rather than two.
Yeah, it's really cool, and it's just, again, one of those very special things that you don't see a lot today, and it's wonderful. Switching gears here a little bit, just because this happened at the time that we're recording this just happened a couple nights ago, but this will air a couple weeks later here. You headlined, and this is important for the young generation who may not be as familiar with you. This is about treating you and your career with respect. You headlined Radio City Music Hall.
Well, that was, yeah, go ahead.
You performed at Radio City Music Hall, and 3 nights ago, Paul Zerden was crowned the new winner of America's Got Talent at Radio City Music Hall.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah.
Did you watch that, and was that a really cool full circle thing for you?
Well, in my day, there were really no headliners at the Radio City Music Hall.
Yes, sir.
If there were, it was the Rockettes, and of course they always closed the show with their high kicks.
Yeah,
and people waited for that. They actually came to see the Rockettes. So I was all, when I worked there, and I worked there several times, I was just a featured act, like they used to say, the Rockettes. They would have a couple of jugglers and a couple of production numbers, and also featuring Jimmy Nelson. Oh, yeah. So it was that kind of a headliner.
Oh, cool. That's still cool. I assumed it was a headliner because I saw that poster that was just you and had mention of Radio City. So I had assumed it was something that I guess it wasn't. But that's still very cool to know, and it just seeing Paul get crowned at Radio City was just brought me back to thinking about how you had performed there, and it's really cool to see what's happened to ventriloquism, in this generation as in yours.
Well, as we all know, Jeff Dunham is the biggest ventriloquism headliner there has ever been.
Yeah.
Up until this time, it's been, you go all the way back to Edgar Bergen. He had his own radio show, later had his own television show, and you could definitely call him a headliner.
Oh, yeah.
When he appeared in Las Vegas, he was always the headliner there. So, but we have to go back so far to find any really superstar until Jeff came along, and we owe him a great debt to ventriloquism.
And you're a mentor to him, and he loves you very much. I remember one year you couldn't make it to Vent Haven, and he was on stage doing his lecture, and he called you, put you on the microphone, and everybody cheered real loud and said hello. What do you attribute? You got to watch him grow up from the convention. What do you attribute to his success? What was the spark with him?
With Jeff?
Yeah.
Jeff and I have a certain parallels in our career.
Yeah.
We both started doing ventriloquism. That's all we ever wanted to do. Same with me. Same with Jeff. He has and has today a great desire to be one of the best ventriloquists ever was, and he is.
Yeah.
But he has taken it to a new dimension. In my day, I had 2 figures, sometimes 3. Jeff has a whole family of figures, so he has taken it a little farther than any of us had done.
Yeah, it's cool. But, you were an inspiration to him, and you're an inspiration to so many because Danny and Farfel were endeared to the nation too. Let's not downplay what you did. So I got to ask you off of that, what do you think endeared your characters to the nation, and why those Nestle's ads and all of your shows were so popular? What was the draw with the characters?
I think probably Frank Marshall had a lot to do with that.
Yeah.
Frank Marshall carved Danny O'Day, and he did a beautiful job. Danny's face is angelic almost, and then when his little barbs come out of him, it's funny.
Yeah.
So as a contrast there, a good-looking little boy who knows how to put the older people down. That's his character.
Yeah.
And it seemed to be something that people enjoyed. The television spots, and I did a lot of commercials over the years, were very short. It wasn't me coming on and doing a 5-minute spot. These were 30-second commercials. And for some reason or other, it seemed to grab the people, and they waited for the next one. At least that's what people tell me.
Yeah.
So the characters came across on television. It wasn't just what you see at Radio City. You might be sitting in the 50th row, so you really don't get a close-up of them. But television would come in nice and close, and you'd see this wonderful face that Danny has, and the cuteness of Farfel. You got a chance to see them as if you were right there next to them. And television was a great medium for me.
Yeah. It's wonderful to see. And your other partner in crime, we're talking about Danny. Let's talk about Farfel. When did Farfel enter the picture, and why a dog? Why a dog as a contrast to the cute but sarcastic little boy?
Very good question, because I had not anticipated using a dog or any other kind of animal. This was strictly an accident, and Betty was involved in it. We were working a nightclub out in the Midwest, and I was in the middle of the show, and it was one of those shows where your audience, it's late at night, and it was not a full house.
Yeah.
So you get to fool around, and you get to ad-lib with your characters. and somebody had left a little stuffed doll sitting on the piano. I don't know who or why. I turned around and I was trying to ad-lib, and I reached out and grabbed this little thing and then started fooling. Actually, I didn't grab him. I said, Betty, will you bring that out, please? And she did. And she and Farfel, well, it wasn't Farfel, it was just a stuffed dog, began to talk back and forth, and the audience started to laugh. And I said, I've got something here. If I can get laughs on straight lines, boy, I better put this guy into the act. But it was just a little stuffed dog, and Betty fooled around him a little more and took him off stage, and we forgot about him until later on. And I said, that might make a good character, and she agreed. And we went back to Chicago and back to Frank Marshall and said, Frank, I've got a dog for you. And I don't think Frank had ever made an animal before. I'm not sure of that.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, it's interesting you say that because Farfel is built unlike any other animal puppet you see. It's hard to put your finger on it, but the way the mouth claps shut and that he's he's wooden, but he's a dog at the same time. He's built like unlike any other animal you've ever seen. It's a very interesting figure design.
Yeah, and there again is Frank Marshall, because I had, by the way, taken this stuffed dog and showed it to him, and it was in a sitting position with the head down, in a very sad-looking character. And I told Frank, this is what I want. I want people to be sympathetic to this little dog, because Danny is going to put him down pretty good.
Yeah.
And that's how it turned out to be. Farfel doesn't do. Matter of fact, we don't do doggy jokes with Farfel. We ignore the fact that he's a dog, except for an occasional reference.
Yeah, it's a wonderful character, and it's a wonderful dichotomy. So I have to ask, now this is this I think you're going to tell the story that we all could hear on the extra features of I'm No Dummy. There's an extra extended half-hour interview from the interview you did with Brian Simon for that incredible documentary. Was there a character that didn't work for you? I think you mentioned, in I'm No Dummy, you mentioned Fatata Tita, the cat. But that's a logical progression. You have a dog, you should have a cat, but Fatata Tita didn't necessarily work.
And that's the problem with Fatata Tita. It was too practical. It was too obvious. You've got a dog, so you got to have a cat. And Fatata Tita, I don't know if you've ever seen a picture of her, but she's beautiful.
Oh, she is, yes.
She here again, another Frank Marshall creation. And I gave her a kind of a stupid, funny voice. So it would be different from Farfel. And I put some routines together. We worked a few nightclubs with her, all the other characters, and brought her in somewhere in the middle of the act. And she got a mild reception, but the laughs always came from Farfel, not from her. So she wound up being the straight man for the dog, and that wasn't my intention. I wanted her to be another one of the stars of the show. Anyway, I gave her a good chance. I even did a few television spots. We even did a Nestle commercial with her. And it became obvious that this was just slowing the show down, as things that aren't working will do for you. And I couldn't afford to do that. So I kept her around. I made a few appearances with her for one reason or another. But as far as putting her in the act, we retired her.
Yeah, it's interesting because even somebody as well known and established and as high profile as you still go through the creative ups and downs. Nothing's ever perfect,
That's correct. That's correct. She was a disappointment, and I still think she's beautiful. And matter of fact, when they had that wonderful tribute to me at the Van Haven Museum, we had her on display as well, and had a lot of wonderful comments about, oh, isn't that a good-looking figure?
Yeah.
Well, that wasn't enough.
Is there a reason you stayed loyal to Frank Marshall as a figure maker and didn't say, well, I want a different look for this character, so I'm going to go over here? Everything was built by Marshall.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that
Frank,
relationship?
Frank and I became very good friends. He also lived in Chicago, and so I was able to visit his shop when he was doing something for me. He even made duplicates for me, so I would have. I was loyal to Frank because, frankly, he's the best.
Yeah.
He was the best in my estimation, and a lot of other vets will agree with me. So it was just not just loyalty to a friend, but it was the fact that I felt he was the best figure maker, and I wanted the best.
Yeah, and I've heard you've often referred to Danny as, and I love this comparison, you've often referred to Danny as your Stradivarius. It's wonderful.
So that goes along with what I've just been saying.
Yeah.
And I always felt that he was.
Yeah. But it's more than just, being built by somebody who was, the Stradivarius of figure makers, but the respect that you show Danny. He's an instrument and not a toy.
Oh, yes. Oh, definitely not a toy.
Oh, of course not. No, I just think sometimes we get too hopped up on, as Vince, we get too hopped up on, the next puppet or the next figure, and we don't focus our time and energy on the one instrument we could play very, very well. And you have played Danny very well, if I may continue with that analogy, throughout your entire career.
Yeah, Danny was from the first day that Frank handed him to me. I knew that this character was going to work for me. He just had the look, and the idea of the voice I already had in mind was going to fit him perfectly. I used the falsetto voice for Danny for many, many years, and it was just a little. It made it just a little bit different from the guttural voice that most people use for the vent figure.
And it made it charming. It made everything about. That's what I love about Danny, is everything about him was charming, and then he would say these things and put you down and put Farfel down. But you were so endeared by him that it didn't really matter, and it was hysterical.
Yeah, I don't think people took offense at him. I never, even when I worked nightclubs, I never worked with risque material. I didn't need it. Some people need it because they have to do that to get any laughs. I didn't. Danny could, with a wink of the eye and a little fast sly line about a lady in the audience, could get away with a few little things that you wouldn't do on a children's show, let's say.
Yeah.
But never anything that you would call risque.
Right, and it's wonderful that you maintained that class throughout your career. The question I have for you, this is going back to your generation of Vents, and we lump you in terms of just that generation with Edgar, Paul, and so many others. What do you? I want to hear your thoughts on what made each Vent from your generation special. I think it's so interesting that generation has inspired this generation, and we don't get a glimpse into that generation except for you. So what made that generation of Vents so special?
Well, you're talking. I want to make sure you're answering the question. You're talking about the years when I was popular.
Of course, sir. Yes.
And what made that different from this generation?
Well, no, I mean, we look at Edgar and Paul and you, and they're all special for all of their different reasons. I'm wondering, you talked earlier about looking up to Edgar Bergen, and enjoying Paul Winchell. What made each of those Vents in your generation special? to you?
I see. Yeah. Well, to answer that, I have to go back to compare Bergen and Winchell and myself.
Of course, please.
Bergen, of course, was the big star, and for many years. And Paul came along, and television loved him too. By the way,
Yeah.
Paul was very, very successful on television with his own show. And I had my own show for a while on ABC, but most people remember me from the commercials.
Yes.
And that's apparently commercials are little short vignettes, which is what we tried to do. Paul had his own show, and of course, so did Edgar Bergen. I don't know what made them all so special. I think it was the time and the place that they were. Can you imagine a ventriloquist on radio?
Yeah.
And yet there was Edgar Bergen, very, very successful for about 18 years on radio before he went to television.
Yeah.
And Paul took over his own show. He was able to do some very, very innovative things, including making the hands and the arms move. The drums, play the trumpet, all these things that he could do with other people, assistants, helping him behind the scenes. So I think we all were doing innovative things at the time. We weren't the usual ventriloquists, as I said before, that sat on the knee and told jokes.
Yeah, and I think the reason people remember you for the commercials is because they were so different. You don't see that today, and I don't think you really saw that. I mean, the spokesperson idea was more prevalent back then, but you certainly didn't have it where it was a ventriloquist and endearing skits like you would do for Nestle's specifically. That you didn't have that, and it was just so endearing and charming, and nobody else was doing it. I think that's why people think and automatically associate you with that, first of all, because it's just so special.
Yeah, as I said, commercials today use personalities, but not very long. They use them for a few spots, and then they move on to somebody else.
Yeah.
My tenure with Nestle lasted for 10 consecutive years.
Wow.
Now, when you're doing commercials for one product every week or several times a week for 10 years, you're bound to get a lot of good recognition, especially if they enjoy them.
Yeah.
I have a lot of people come to me to this day that remember the Nestle commercial. That was a long time ago. To think that people still remember and look forward to watching them.
Yeah. How did they find you, or how did you get that role to be able to be their spokesperson?
Oh, how did I get the Nestle job?
Yes.
Yeah, I've told that story before, and I don't know if I've told it on the I'm No Dummy tape, but it was an audition process. They were looking for a novelty act to do. They were using Roy Rogers and Dale Evans at the time, and they liked them, but they wanted something more novel. And so I went in and auditioned for it. The story goes, they gave me a piece of paper with the jingle and said, "How would you do this with your characters?" And so off the cuff, I looked at it, and I can read music, so I read it was a simple melody. And so I had Danny sing, N-E-S-T-L-E-S, Nestle's next to very best. And I had to figure quickly, how do I end this? And Farfel was there with me, and he did the line, chocolate. Unfortunately, I was nervous. My fingers on the controls were wet, and the fingers slipped, and the mouth clapped shut.
Yeah.
Bang, and that was an accident. I didn't mean to do. You don't do that. A ventriloquist is not supposed to make the figure's mouth clap. And I did that, and I think I said sorry, and the people in the room were laughing.
That's great.
Thought it was funny.
It's awesome.
And so, consequently, they hired me, and I did it for 10 years.
It's wonderful. It's
It's a wonder he didn't wear his mouth out.
It's a beautiful story. Now, I got to ask you, I have two last questions for you. You only recently retired. I think the official kind of mark was when they honored you at Vent Haven. When you look back on your career, how would you describe it?
How would I describe?
Yeah, if you put it into a sentence, all the fun you had, meeting Betty, doing the commercials, how would you describe this legendary career that will live on for the ages?
Well, I can describe my entire career, starting from 10 years old right through my age today, as a wonderful time. Wow. I enjoyed every minute of it. I mean, you did your you did your good shows and your bad shows, but all in all, I had a great time. When I finally got some notoriety, I worked some of the nicest, finest clubs in the country, and had a chance to work on all of the top television shows. It was a successful career that I look back on as something I would do it again in a minute.
I love that. That's beautiful. Now, since your event and since this podcast started in the Vent community, this is my favorite question to end with. What do you want to see? You attend the convention every single year. What are you most excited about, and what do you want to see from the ventriloquists coming up today that are just falling in love with it?
I see what we call the Children's University sessions.
Yeah.
Children, and I say children, they go up to the teens, but they start 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. I see a lot of potential here. I always drop in and watch part of the children performing. They teach them the basics, but basically they teach them how to get up in front of an audience and perform. And I see some very, very potential excellent ventriloquists who are, if they want to be, are probably on the way up.
That's wonderful. Well, you described your career as a wonderful time, and that's how I would describe this conversation with you, Mr. Jimmy Nelson. Thank you so much for being with us on our 100th episode. What a treat. Thank you so much.
And thank you for inviting me. You have a wonderful show, and I hope you have another 100 years.
Thank you, Jimmy Nelson. Thank you. Wow, what an honor that was. The timing of this whole thing lined up perfectly, thanks to Brian W. Simon and Marge at Montevegas Productions, the team behind I'm No Dummy. I love you guys. Thank you for making this happen. And everyone else, buy the movie. I talked about it at the top. Jimmy and I talked about it in the interview. But it is re-released with over 2 hours of features on a second disc, including an additional 30 minutes with Jimmy Nelson. Well, I said all I needed to say today at the top, and I think we're all tired of the sound of my voice at this point. That's it for us this week. We'll see you in 2 weeks on November 2nd. In the meantime, you can find all you need to know about Talk for Two by going to our website, talk4spellout2.com. Reach out by emailing talk, FORTWO, @gmail.com. And find our group or like us on Facebook by searching for Talk, FORTWO. Tweet us and about us using @ and hashtag Talk4Two. The website's the only one with the numeral. Signing off with a huge thank you to everyone for Talk for Two. I'm Matt Bailey, reminding all you vents out there to keep talking for two.
You can hear more show business interviews with the stars at talk4two.com, where you'll also find one-of-a-kind products to improve your own show. That's talk, the number 4, TWO.com.